"I believe you are wrong, Your Grace." She said it plainly, without flinching, in a room full of men who had never once told me anything of the sort. I was 37 years old. I held one of the largest estates in the north of England, a dukedom stretching from moorland to coast, and a reputation, I was assured by everyone who depended upon me, that made lesser men leave their correspondence unanswered for a fortnight rather than risk my displeasure. No one corrected me. No one had seriously attempted it in years. And there stood Miss Elowen Pask, the daughter of my father's old steward, a woman of no fortune and no particular standing, in my library, with a copy of Halkett's Agricultural Survey open in one hand and her chin lifted as though she had every right in the world to contradict a duke. She had every right. That was the part I could not say aloud. I had been holding forth at some length, I confess it now, though the admission costs me something, on the drainage methods of the lower fields. My estate manager, Turnbull, had nodded. The two gentlemen from the County Agricultural Board had nodded. My head gardener, who understood nothing whatsoever about drainage, but who had been present at estate meetings for 20 years and nodded on principle, had nodded with particular enthusiasm. Elowen Pask had been standing at the far end of the library table, consulting a survey I had not invited her to touch, saying nothing for the better part of 20 minutes. Then, quietly and without any apparent grasp of the social danger she was in, she had said those 6 words. "Point to the passage you are relying on." I said, because I was not going to let a steward's daughter dismantle my argument before my staff without requiring her to do it properly. She turned Halkett to page 44 and slid it across the table. She tapped the 3rd paragraph with one finger. Then she waited. I read it. I read it twice. The blood moved in my face in a manner I had not permitted it to do since I was perhaps 16. The passage was unambiguous. My position on the fall gradient of the Eastern Channel was, in the precise technical language of the survey, untenable. "Where did you obtain this volume?" I asked, because it was either that or admit the thing she was waiting for me to admit. "From this shelf," she said, with a slight gesture toward the wall behind her. "Behind your copy of Bramley's Crop Rotation, which has not been opened in some time, Your Grace." The last 2 words arrived a beat after the rest of the sentence, as though she had remembered them as an afterthought. I suspected she had. Turnbull studied the floor. The gentlemen from the Agricultural Board found reasons to rearrange their papers. I closed Halkett, set it on the table between us, and said, with all the composure I possessed, "I will have Turnbull review the channel specifications before we proceed." "That would be wise," said Elowen Pask. She said it without a trace of triumph. That was what struck me. There was no gleam, no satisfaction, none of the small pleasure people generally take in having bested someone who outranks them. She simply meant it. She thought it would be wise, and she said so, and then she stepped back from the table and waited for the meeting to continue. I found it impossible to continue the meeting. I dismissed the others, Turnbull with a look that told him to say nothing of this to anyone, which he would ignore entirely, because Turnbull had been with me since I was 8 and felt perfectly entitled to tell the cook whatever he pleased. And I stood at the library window and attempted to account for the feeling that had settled in my chest. Not humiliation, precisely. Something stranger than that. Something that sat alongside the discomfort and refused to be dismissed along with the rest of them. She had gone by then. She had gathered her notes and left with the same quiet composure with which she had arrived, and I was left with the Eastern Channel specifications and the increasingly inconvenient awareness that the most interesting conversation I had held in that library in years had lasted approximately 4 minutes and had concluded with my conceding a point. I thought about that for the rest of the afternoon. She came the following Thursday. Her father had been my father's steward for 30 years, and when old Mr. Pack's eyes had finally failed him, it had been Elowen who kept his records, who read the county surveys, who corresponded with the Agricultural Board on his behalf. I had known this in the way one knows a great many things about the people on one's estate as a catalogued fact without having truly engaged with it. The woman who came on Thursdays to verify the quarterly land records against my father's older ledgers was, I had always assumed, a competent functionary, a useful pair of hands. I had been remarkably imprecise. I was in the library when she arrived that Thursday. This was not, I informed myself, significant. "Your Grace." She set her satchel on the table and drew out the ledger without looking at me. She did not seem surprised to find me there. "Miss Pask." I had positioned myself at the reading chair with a volume of something I had not read a single word of. I've had Turnbull recalculate the Eastern Channel gradient. I know, she said without looking up from the ledger she was opening. He told me. Did he? He also told me you were remarkably gracious about it. She glanced up then, briefly, and there was the smallest suggestion of a smile at the corner of her mouth. I confess I assumed he was being diplomatic. He was, I said. She laughed. A short, unguarded sound, the kind a person produces when they encounter something they genuinely had not expected to find funny and find it anyway. I had not made anyone laugh in my library in a considerable time. I did not entirely know what to do with the warmth that rose in me at the sound of it. I stayed. I told myself I had correspondence to review. After a quarter of an hour, I set the correspondence aside and asked her what she made of the northern boundary map, because I genuinely wished to know, and because she was the first person I had encountered in this house in longer than I cared to measure who would tell me plainly if the answer was inconvenient. She told me. She told me in considerable detail, with her finger tracing the disputed parcels along the eastern ridgeline, and I leaned forward across the table to follow what she was pointing to, and at some point during the discussion of hedgerow enclosures we were standing close enough that I could see the ink stain on her left thumb and the way one dark curl at her temple had come loose from its pin. I straightened. She did not appear to notice that I had needed to. The Thursdays accumulated. 3 of them passed, then 5. I began to find reasons to be in the library when she arrived, and eventually I stopped inventing reasons and simply was there, with tea already sent for, which she accepted without remark, but which I observed she did not refuse. I was not a man accustomed to uncertainty. I had been certain of most things since I was 19, but in those mornings I found myself unsure of quite ordinary things, whether to sit or stand, whether the thing I wished to say would be welcome, whether the particular quality of her attention when I spoke meant anything beyond professional care. She challenged me regularly. She disagreed with me on the rotation of the southern fields, on the tenure terms for 2 of the tenant farms, on the relative merits of a new draining machine the agricultural board was proposing. She was, as far as I could determine, nearly always right. She never gloated. She never once deferred to spare my dignity. I was entirely undone by it. By all of it, the precision of her, the steadiness of her, the fact that she had walked into my library, found it wanting, and simply gone and retrieved the correct book from the shelf without any particular ceremony about it. On the 6th Thursday, I asked her to walk with me to the Eastern Channel, ostensibly to observe Turnbull's revised specifications in the field. She looked at me for a moment, a measuring look steadier than usual, and then she said yes. We stood at the channel bank in a gray November afternoon, and she said the revised gradient was correct and would hold through a hard winter, and I said that was good, and then neither of us said anything for a while. The rooks were making a considerable noise in the beeches above us. "Miss Pask," I said, "Your Grace." There was a note of caution in it now, careful and still. "I find that I am remarkably poor at this," I said. "I thought it only fair to warn you in advance." She turned to look at me, and I watched the moment she understood what I was saying. The way the caution in her face shifted into something quieter. Not soft exactly, but open. "I had suspected as much," she said. "Is that a discouraging answer?" She was quiet for a moment. The rooks continued overhead. "No," she said at last. "It is an honest one. I have always preferred those. I knew that." She had taught me that, across 6 Thursday mornings, 1 ledger and 1 drainage survey at a time. "Then honestly," I said, "I would very much like to walk you back to the house, and ask you to come next Thursday and the Thursday after, and keep asking until you tell me to stop. That," she said, very precisely, "would be wise." She said it the same way she had said it in the library weeks before when she had been advising me on gradient specifications. But this time, I was nearly certain. She was smiling. I offered her my arm. She took it without hesitation. We walked back through the gray November afternoon, and I could not have told you, in that moment, whether I was more grateful for the Eastern Channel having been wrong, or for the woman who had seen fit to say so. But I knew, with the first unguarded certainty I had felt in years, that I was glad she had come to that table, that she had picked up the book from that neglected shelf, and that she had not, for a single moment, paused to consider whether I was a duke before she told me the truth. That was the beginning of everything. Every good thing I have known since came from that first, clear, honest sentence. From the woman who walked into my library and was not afraid of me, and was not fooled by me, and did not need a single thing from me except the chance to be heard. She was right about far more than the drainage. She has been right, as it happens, about nearly everything.